My bad, man.
No, that I just wanted to like get your consent. Okay, yeah, we're recording now,
Yeah.
coming live. Let me just, well, as we hit the record button, let's take a breath and just drop into an intention.
Mm.
May this conversation be a blessing to you, to me, and to everyone who hears it
Mm.
as we get into integral hip hop and into this human experience in this time and place. So I'm here with Justin Miles, Jehu Worldwide.
Sir.
What's your
What's
other alias? You have another producer alias.
Ascience Known?
Yes. How did say it again?
Patience. It is the opposite of omniscience.
Oh,
Uh,
we're okay.
so it is not knowing knowing. So Asians is the opposite of omniscience, which is all knowing. So Asians is not knowing, and then known refers to gnosis, which is knowing. And so Asians known is not knowing knowing. Yeah.
I'm with it. I'm with
We'll
it.
talk
That's
about
that
it.
that's a
Okay.
good no, that's like that's what we're getting into. We're trying to like get this knowledge so we can let go of it and come into wisdom.
There you go.
And yeah, so Justin, can you just weave together just who you are, your upbringing, and in this kind of lens of integral hip hop? So like
Yeah.
in yeah, just let us know
Yeah.
what's up.
Let's see. We'll try and keep it all together.
Yeah.
Um, oh, I don't know if you can hear that outside. There's some beef going on right outside my window.
I can't hear it.
Okay. It was loud for a second. I didn't know how loud
Okay.
it was. Um, yeah, let's see. Justin Forrest Miles. I was born in Washington, D.C. in 1976, March 15th. And so it was like right in the beginnings of hip hop's coming into the world and the world becoming aware of what hip hop is. And I my my relationship with hip hop started, I think, like a lot of people's did at the time, and that was like as a form of just connecting, especially during lunch at the lunch table. You know,
Making
of
the
course, it was like
beats.
making the beats. And and that was like my earliest recollection was that's what we did, man. Like it was if it was like 70, 79, 1980, like that's what you did. You were at the lunch table and you got around and you sat at the table and did your best to hold down a beat. And if you could rhyme, somebody would rhyme. And if you didn't rhyme like me, I didn't rhyme at the time. I was just like on the beat or just like a passive observer. Um, but my earliest years um where I was surrounded by hip hop, but I was like a non-participant, just like a witness of what was going on at the time. My uncle is or was a music producer at the time, and he was a producer for a lot of DC, Washington DC's biggest go-go bands at the time. So Chuck Brown and the Soul Searchers, DC Scorpio, not Essence, EU, Experience Unlimited, all those early foundational go-go groups. He was a producer of, and so he also was like an influence in my life. He had a studio in his basement, and he had the biggest stars in the area coming through, um, and so I got right through him. I got to see the instruments and sit in the studios behind the big boards and. Um, his record collection is my original record collection between his records and my dad's records that I liberated.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and
Sample
so,
from.
yeah, and so I think between them and and having parents who were like really into music, it really just kind of kept the spirit of kind of the essence of hip hop alive, both in like the kind of the core of where its sound came from, and the ethos, and at the time where everything was just kind of new, and we didn't really know what hip hop was, but it was this thing that was happening around us that seemed like you could participate in it. Um, and so, I like I said, I wasn't really a practitioner, or I didn't really do anything in the culture when I was young. Um, but what I began to realize is that there was um, like within me, there was a desire to like feel connected to something.
Mm-hmm.
I was a kid who was very much so like on the outside of things. Um, I was in like a different class than my peers. Um, when I when I was 4 years old, I was in the fifth grade. Right?
Wow.
I was in I was in the fifth grade class, and so um, for the first 3 years of my life, I did preschool work, and then when I was four, I was doing the work of 10 and 11-year-olds, and so I spent the entire day of my fourth year of life in the fifth grade,
You're like a
and then after
prodigy.
that, well, I was I don't know, I don't that yes, yes, I was doing things my peers weren't doing.
Yeah.
I didn't say that as a pat to give myself a pat on the back, but that it really helped. It really shaped the way that I understood myself and
Mm-hmm.
understood my world. I understood being on the outside of things from a very, very young age, but I also understood paying attention and having to pay attention to what was going on to myself and what was going on outside of myself at a very young age because I wasn't a part of my peer group and I wasn't a part of the group that I was in that they put me in. Um, and so I always had this kind of insider outsider relationship, I think, from as a young person, highly curious, highly inquisitive, able to process things and synthesize information well, but neither received by my my people in my age cohort or by people in a cohort that they were trying to put me in that they thought
Mm.
was going to meet my educational needs.
So you're
And
in
so I
this kind of
settled,
middle spot.
yes, it's a middle spot where it was almost like I just had to, all I had was like paying attention, and whatever I was allowed to pay attention to were the things that um like that was like my relationship with the world. Um, and so I credit that time and that being kind of a part of me throughout all of my life that has allowed me to take a stance to look at hip hop through the lens of metatheory or to look at what hip hop could be other than music because I never really had to keep up with. I never really was going to get the validation from my peers, and then and then I always took the stance of the rest of the world who may have been older than me or knew or thought that they knew more than me, also may not have seen things the way that they could be seen either, you
Mm.
know. And so I realized that um, it kind of gave me this freedom to be a pariah and receive criticism or be criticized. Um, but if I could see something that you couldn't fuck with
Mm. No doubt.
that. You couldn't fuck with it. And so it was like it was undeniable. You could argue, you could argue with me, but if you couldn't like disprove it, then it was like, okay, well then I'm okay because I still have the
Yeah.
space. So anyway, I said all that to say that I feel like that's been a driver of how I've come to understand hip hop over the years. Um, and my father was a follower of Malcolm, and he was an atheist, and we really weren't forced to um, like become something or believe something outside of be proud of who you are as a Black person.
Mm.
And see benefiting your people as important, and loving your people as important. And so that was a big piece of how I came to understand myself and hip hop, that it was, in a sense, it was useless um, if um, if it was going to somehow divorce me from being a benefit from Black people or people in general, and people in general. But then also, it never for me became um, like it was never dogma for me.
Mm.
That I think the having the freedom to not have to force myself into some conceptual framework that wasn't going to measure up to reality anyway. It was just going to be my adoption of someone else's framework. If it wasn't a framework that gave me the ability to um, um, kind of freely explore and see it from as many perspectives as I can, I couldn't get with it. And so I think part of my both my parents not raising my sister and I with any sense of like a solid religious dogma or faith also kind of gave us that ability and experience of um, um, of not showing any real fealty to um, any um, any one perspective on hip hop. That even
Mhm.
as I began to MC or DJ or producer, I never was like, yeah, I'm a this or I'm a that or
Yeah.
it's almost like, well, let me explore that, let me experience, but not hold, right? Let me, if it's like an archetype, let me put on that armor or put on um, that what is it, that identity for a minute and
Yeah.
inhabit it and see what it's like. But again, I think that also has kind of added to how I wound up eventually at Metatheory, which allows for that kind of dynamism of experience and perspective taking on anything really, but really on hip hop is what we're talking about. And so,
What
um,
was your journey into first like participating in MCN and producing? Was that like kind of later in your adolescent years, or
yeah,
and is
you
there
know,
any like is there any like story of like when you first were hopped in the cypher, first shared a song or made a beat?
yeah, I am, I'm even today, I'm not I'm both the guy that'll be outrageous, and that'll be like, I don't know if I should put myself out there,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I, and so very often I'll be like in the corner somewhere, and then maybe I'll get fed up and say, fuck it, I'm gonna come out and just like smash shit, and then I'll be
Yeah. Give me that mic. Yeah.
right, give it back. What are you doing with this? Um, And so, like, my my earliest recollection of even rhyming was like being on the cheese bus, being on the school bus, and my friend Roger Campbell, he could rhyme, and Roger had a rhyme, and he would almost like he had wrote a rhyme, and like that was like the dopest shit he could ever write at the age of like 10 or 11. So he kicked this one rhyme over and over again, and so I ended up, and he was like my best friend at the time. So I ended up almost like memorizing this rhyme that he wrote, and so
Okay,
I could
yeah.
like participate in rhyming with him. But I didn't have I didn't write any rhymes or whatever. Um, but that's my earliest recollection is like trying to be down with rhyming through my friend who could rhyme, but I couldn't rhyme at all. And I didn't really have any aspirations of becoming something like being an MC or at least not in my my preteen years. Um, all I ever really wanted to be was a DJ.
Mm.
And and when I was 15, um, there was a guy in my neighborhood. His name was Trader James, and Trader James would like trade you shit like he would like trade you stuff. So if you had stuff to trade with James, you could you didn't have to pay for it. You could give him stuff, and he'd give you stuff. And so Trader James had two Technique turntables, but they were like your grandmother's or your mother's turntable. They're like SL B200s or something like that. They were not meant for scratching. The
Yeah.
heads were not meant for scratching. And so I was like, all right, boom, I'm gonna trade. I can't remember what I traded him. I traded him something, and he gave me two turntables. And then my best friend Hashim, his cousin Boosie had a two-channel mixer with a crossfader. It had like
Nice.
volume, crossfader, and like off and on switch. And it was like
Yeah.
like this big. Um, and I think I paid $6, $3, $6 to Boosie for that. And then my uncle soldered my wires. My music producer uncle,
Yeah.
um, he soldered. We went to the studio. He pulled out the solder and soldering iron, and he made me some wires, and that was it. I had wax paper for felt for my slip mats, and I've used nickels and pennies to weigh down the shell heads, and I would rubber band them to the shell heads, and that was it. That was my initial DJ setup, and I used to skip school and go into DC and buy records, and that was it, man. I used to just practice endlessly on after school and on Saturdays, just mixing and baby scratches and learn how to cut. And that's all I ever really genuinely aspired to be, because for me that was like the background. That was for me that was the backbone of it all. DJing was the back
Yep.
is the backbone of MCing. DJing is the backbone of producing. It's the nature of producing. And so um in terms of its, in terms of MCing and DJing, I mean not to disclude Graph and B-Boy, but in terms of like what was there around me, like that was the background of everything was DJing. Plus, you were dope, not if you could like if you were dope with like mixing or scratching, you were dope if you knew where shit came from. So if you understood,
Mm,
right, if you understood like where a dope sample comes from and
yeah.
who makes the music and who was on the albums of the people that made the sample that you like, then you were like you were a curator and a historian, and
Yeah.
you were like a hunter, and you were like finding like the dopest shit. And
You had an archive of all that history.
yeah,
And were
yeah.
you tapping into your uncle and parents' record collections?
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That was it. That was my uncles, my fathers, and whatever I could get from liner notes, because liner notes were the shit at the time.
Yeah.
And then that's where your education came from as a producer. Is I need to know who Grant Green is, who's Ron Carter,
Yeah.
I've heard these Miles Davis albums. What about the ones I haven't heard? And so I was digging at the same time as like my favorite producers were digging: the Primo, Q-Tip, Large Professor, Pete Rock. Those were like my the people that I looked up to. But I was also finding the same samples that they were finding at the exact same time that they were finding them. And I would
Mm.
know this because I would go to the studio with records, and then I would be like, I would say to my uncle, like, hey, can we like loop this on your, ancient MPC or ancient MP12
Yeah.
record? And we would loop it. And then sometime right after that, I would hear like, oh man, Pete Rock just used that shit. Or I'd be like, oh man, Q-Tip just used that shit. But it
Yeah.
was dope because like that was what it for me,
You were
that's what it
tuned
was
in.
about. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was about being tuned in. I wasn't even I knew I couldn't keep up with them, but in my circle, it was about being the person who introduced sound to people and unheard sound to people. So it's
Mm.
like, how can I educate people with these sounds? And so that was it, man. All I ever really want to do was be a DJ. And so I started DJing in like 90, 91, and never stopped DJing, of course. But I started producing. I got my first music equipment in 96. I got an ASR 10.
Okay.
My uncle hooked me up and bought an ASR 10. And that was around the time when I also started really freestyling. Because being a DJ, you're just listening
That's
to
what I was gonna
instrumental.
ask you. Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, that was it. Being a DJ is like alone time. It's just me, and I got like either 2 or 3 minutes to find the next record to put on and mix into this record, or I can just extend this joint and just play.
Yeah.
I got doubles. I'll
You
just shit.
got
I'll
this
just play
dope
back.
beat and it's bringing out vibrations in you, so you're just letting the
Yep.
freestyle. So you started freestyling just kind of with you and the turntables.
Just being turntables. And then it was me turntables, and well, this is all also this is also going on during a time when there was the rise um, of cannabis, right?
Mm-hmm.
In hip hop, right? It was like 92, 93, 94. Weed was the thing. And so right around that time, I was like,
Yep.
okay, what's the experience of rhyming and weed, or what permission, right? Did
Yeah.
weed grant me, right, to show up?
Yeah.
Because for me, it was like, oh man, all pistons are firing now,
Yeah. Yeah.
different kind of freedom.
There's
And I,
neuroreceptors are connected to this medicine, and here we go.
yep, yep, here we go. Let's see what comes up on the medicine. And so that's
Yeah.
a lot of what it was for me. It was like, oh, this is like a different kind of um almost freedom, because I realized
Yeah.
my when my mind moved in that way, it was less self-conscious, right?
Yeah.
And I just trusted in whatever arose in the moment. And then trusting in whatever arose was like, oh well, that was in me. Like, oh wow, I didn't
Yeah.
know I could do that. I'm not even making it up. A lot of her early freestyling was like biting, right? It was like, I don't. I don't have a
Yeah.
style, so I'm just gonna rhyme like Q-Tip, but it's gonna be like a freestyle like Q-Tip, or I'm gonna freestyle like, whatever. But after a
Like
while, I was just like blacking out,
like you say in your void school rules of trusting in spaciousness and presence. That was like the beginning of it right there.
That's it. Yep, yep. And so I'm not, you know, uh, not to crap on younger me, but um, I, my theory isn't having to always use a substance or
Yeah.
some medicine to grant you permission. Um, at the same time, I advocate for people experiencing different states of consciousness through medicine, but never confusing that, as Kim Wilber would say, don't confuse the state with stage, right? So because having a state of consciousness experience is not the same as saying I've evolved to this as a stable stage of my development,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's just supposed to introduce you to an experience that says if you practice this
Mm.
without the medicine, you can stabilize this as a stage of your development. And
Ooh.
so that's what I started to do was like, oh, well, that exists. This experience exists. Well, how do I do that naturally? How do we practice this,
Yeah.
so we can stabilize this as a stage of our development? Um,
Yeah.
so
That's what's
anyway,
up.
that's where freestyling and in '96 is when I started emceeing. I was part of a group, and then I went to college and started and was a part of another group called Phonetic Armageddon. And
I like that name, Phonetic
yeah,
Armageddon.
we,
What
we
college were you at?
we're at Towson here in Baltimore,
Okay,
and
nice.
yeah, Phonetic Armageddon came from Roscos, All Earth as It Is in Heaven. He
Mm,
says on his first album, Soul on Ice.
yeah.
Um, what did he say? Like Rostas has be dreaded, phonetic Armageddon on earth as it is in heaven.
Yeah.
Anyway, so so yeah, man, phonetic, and then it was from there. It was just like, all right, MCing, DJing, beatboxing, producing at the time, and then moved into journalism. Started doing guerrilla journalism. I was sneaking to shows. I had a fake press press badge and press credentials, and I would sneak
Yes.
backstage. It shows, and I'll interview my favorite artists, and I would only ask them. I would never ask them questions about music or their albums coming out or anything like that. I would only ask them questions about human development, spirituality, um, how
That's
they
beautiful.
understood their music as a tool of growth. So
Yeah.
that way, my theory was if I could get them to tell me how they understood what they did, and I could translate that in a developmental way, I can help the world use what they did to grow, to right. So if I could talk to, um, you know, like when I interviewed Saul Williams, if I can get Saul
Ooh,
Williams to
one of
talk
my
to me about,
favorite poets.
yeah,
Yes.
man, yeah, yeah, man. If I can get Saul to tell me about his spiritual practice,
Mm,
or if I could get him to tell me how he feels like his spiritual practice influences how he writes and his perspective on writing. What would happen if we could engage in that practice or in those practices? Will we experience the same type of openness, not to imitate him, but to at the very least emulate that type of freedom or
little
that type of
sample. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So anyway, that was my theory, and so I
That's
became.
interesting.
Mhm,
So for you and talking about the stage and states, um, a lot of your writing draws from the Buddhist traditions or Tibetan Buddhism, and you draw a lot of that in. Like,
mhm,
when did you kind of start to get into that Buddhist philosophy,
mhm.
and did you have some like states experiences that kind of and then that got you to a stage of being in that space where you were a journalist who's like, yeah, okay, yeah, your music's cool, but tell me about the state of your soul and what, how
Yeah,
do you channel all that your writing practices and everything.
yeah. Um, I was turned on to Buddhism through judo. I was a judoka and in 1990, and my this is back when martial arts were more art than martial. Um, and And so, we meditated. We practiced Zazen, Zen meditation, and my teacher was a Zen Buddhist, and so, um, he taught not just through the discipline of judo, but he taught the benefit of meditation. And so I
Mm.
meditated with him and at home, 3, 4 times a week from the ages of 14 to about 18. I wasn't studying anything around Buddhism because I didn't have any. I didn't ask my teacher for any texts or anything, and it was more like indirect influence. Um, Really, it was maybe the confluence of like KRS-One, um, maybe knowingly or unknowingly, presenting this kind of this unity conscious view of that we are hip hop.
Yeah.
Uh, and then through studying um, not just Buddhism, but really contemplative traditions as a whole, and seeing that there was this correlation between what KRS was saying is we are hip hop, and with contemplative or mystical schools that were saying, well, no, all that there is this unified and diverse experience of oneness and two-ness, of absolute and relative, and that existing at the heart of most of the world's wisdom and traditions. And so I was really big on studying mysticism when I was in undergrad. And so that whole time
Mm.
between 97, 96, and 2000, I was studying contemplative Christianity, Christian mysticism, Hesychism, Taoism, Sufism, Buddhism. And so all of that was informing me at the time to take that perspective that if you had this group of people who spent their entire, not just lives, but generations, millennia, engaging in these practices that introduced them to this consciousness, well, then I couldn't really deny that, as a reality.
Mm.
Because they weren't saying believe in me. They were saying, nah, we did this.
Yeah.
We sat still and we did this.
Yeah.
Um, and so when I really formally became a Buddhist or really started studying Buddhism was the year 2000. And that was after coming home from my last class in undergrad in Amsterdam,
Mm.
where I was turned on to ayahuasca. And so my
Mm.
ayahuasca experience in Amsterdam, which involved um, this trust in the sacredness in hip hop,
Mm.
called for me to come home from that class and ask myself, well, how do I find a school that would help me to understand and again stabilize that experience to where I would
Yeah.
have to do ayahuasca every
Yeah.
time that this unified experience of hip hop. But Buddhism has been in the back and foreground of my life really since the year 2000. Um, and I've really been able to so I can't remember what writer said it, but he said I became a better Christian when I started studying Buddhism.
Mm.
That Buddhism provides a rational roadmap of the mind and trajectory, the journey of um, coming into a full understanding of both our ignorance and the reality of who and what we are, our ignorance of the phenomenal world and what it is, and the ignorance of the nature of all things and the reality of what it is. And because it's not about believing and it's about practicing and just, saying, hey, go do this thing and see what happens. Um, I've been able to, it's given me the ability to say, all right, well, yeah, well, let me go and just like a scientist, let's go practice it.
Yeah.
Let's go do it. I don't have to believe anything. Let's see what happens if we contemplate these hip hop lyrics. Let's see let's through the lens of meaning meditation. Let's see what happens when these lyrics from these artists mix with the experience of presence or wisdom and see what comes up. And then let's see what happens if I try and live it in my everyday life.
Mm.
And so Buddhism for me has been an excellent tradition um, uh, to um, to serve again as kind of a container for um, how I'm container for like experimenting with the elements in ways that are transformative, at least from a first person perspective. Um, I've again I've started to understand now that um, that Buddhism, because it is highly um, centered around first person perspective and first person experience, that it may not be the vehicle that's most useful for helping me to understand hip hop from a second person or relational perspective, or how it can be
Mhm.
used to cultivate compassion or cultivate relationship between people. So that may be more a task for second person traditions. And so contemplative Christianity is a lens, and I know you've read some of the stuff on the site, like where I've tried to use on the teachings of Christ and look at what do Christ's teachings have to do with the world of hip hop, or with like Harris one talking about I am hip hop,
Yeah.
uh, but looking at how relational um, traditions can help us to understand how we can experiment with hip hop as a tool for relating to each other better, or trusting in each other, or seeing through the ego in each other to see the nature of the other. Um, and only more recently have I started, and I've been practicing with a Lakota community for the last
Mm.
30 years. And so we do sweat lodges about 4 times a year, and vision quests every so often, maybe once every 3 or 4 years, and um, trying to understand how to help hip hop to understand its relationship to the phenomenal world, to nature,
Yeah.
right? The objective world. And so recently I've been contemplating and creating kind of hip hop centered sweat lodge experiences, right?
Wow.
That are less focused on kind of the magic or mythical experiences, but how to use, because for anyone who's never been in sweat lodge, it's an actual process and practice that
Yeah.
um, from beginning, middle, and end. And how can we use not just the process of or the experience of the lodge, but all that goes into the lodge experience, from
Eating the
how you relate to the
rocks.
box, how you relate to
Yeah.
how you relate to
Grandfathers.
how you relate to the space, how you relate to the fire, and how do we use that to connect with the phenomenal world and the natural world better. And so, whatever tradition I've been studying or practicing, I've tried. I don't have any. I don't aspire to be a Christian. I don't aspire to be a Buddhist. I don't aspire to be a Lakota or what have you. I aspire to manifest the nature or experience the nature of what's taught. And
Mm.
then if you look at the nature of what's taught, then you can say, oh, well, how does this show up in everything, right?
Yeah.
Thinking Taoism says, once you know the mother, you know the children, right? And so, if you can
Hmm.
relate to the mother, the nature of it, right, then I can say, well, the children are everywhere. The children are in hip hop. If I can understand the nature of this, then, or the nature of Buddhism, then everything else is just a manifestation of that. And so that's how I begun to look at it. Less of like having any real fealty to any tradition, and more of these things are lenses, they're perspectives. Buddhism, they call them yanas, vehicles. These are vehicles, right? We're not
Yeah.
supposed to the vehicles, you're supposed to get us somewhere. And so,
Yeah. I feel that. That resonates deeply, and I see that kind of going into the next thing I want to ask you is just about integral hip hop.
mhm,
And you mentioned Ken Wilber and his like integral meta theories and whatnot. And
mhm,
just like when did you start connecting these dots of like, oh, hip hop has all of these like elements
mhm.
that are outer practices, but they also can lend themselves to these inner experiences
Yeah.
to know ourselves and and your the four things that you got of
Mhm,
consciousness, culture, craft, and community.
mhm, mhm.
And then you could talk about your book too, because I want to hear about that too. But that might be part two.
I'm excited about it too. I'm still writing it, so
Yeah, the
we're gonna
process.
we're gonna see what's gonna be. Um, yeah, stumbling on the meta theory. um, or being introduced to Metatheory, better said, um, almost it almost like validated everything that I came across it in 2000, and it validated other perspectives that were being that were showing up in my life at the time. Again, like the KRS One. We are hip hop. We're not doing hip hop. We are hip hop.
Yeah.
Um,
Rap is something you do, hip hop is something you
Rap is
live.
something, hip
That,
hop is something to
yeah.
live. Um, from the golden era, as we say, everything around um, um, exploring our values and
Yeah. Like the native tongues move, all of that stuff. Yeah.
exactly just like the native tongue, just like native tongues and the BDPs, the poor righteous teachers, and the
Yeah.
ex-clans, and all of them that were like, yo, look at our values, our morals, how we understand ourselves as a group. Look at your mind. Look, what's your mind doing? What's it manifesting? It validated, Metatheory validated all of that, because um, for most people, hip hop is an exterior affair, right? It's an outside affair. It's a let's focus on somebody rhyming or DJing or b-boying or graffiti as kind of it's in its objective forms, or we focus on hip hop and how it shows up socially, or its social relationships, social culturally or social politically. Um, but Meta theory says that there are exteriors and interiors of individuals and communities, and um, this experience uh, um, happens for everyone, right? That this is an experience of all of reality. That if there's an inside of any objective, if there's an outside of any objective form, there's also an inside of that objective form as well.
Mm.
And so it said, hey, just don't look in these directions. Look in all of these directions. And if you look in all of these directions, then you'll illuminate, right, all of what something is, or at the very least, all of where something can be explored. You know. And so integral theory really just gave me a roadmap to say, hey, let's explore hip hop through the lens of its not just its outsides, but also its insides, not just not just the outsides of the individuals and the outside of the collective, but the interior of the individuals and the interior of the collective. Um, Also, what helped is being a psychotherapist and being in
Mm.
psychology for the last 25 years, because in studying integral theory and psychology, it really began to flesh out what Wilbur calls the lines, right? What developmental lines existed in the interiors of the individuals, primarily the cognitive lines of our development, the emotional lines of our development. And lines just basically means what are the different paths or areas of growth, and then what are the stages in along those lines of development. So what are the stages of cognitive growth? What are the stages of cognitive growth? What are the stages of emotional growth or emotional development? Um, what are the stages of moral development, right? And so when you look at the lines and the stages within the dimensions of integral theory, you begin to illuminate um, not just um, um, maybe how to understand hip hop from how to understand hip hop in a way that lets you see where it's come from, or its evolution. You get to see kind of its stage like growth, or track it in terms of its altitude. Where does it exist? But it also gives you a path of where to go. If you realize that hip hop exists at a if the hip hop artist exists at a low level of cognition, well, that means that if there's seven stages in this cognitive trajectory or cognitive line, well, then maybe if I can understand that you're at level two, I can help you to get to level three, level four, level five. So it gives me the ability to be beneficial to be
Mm.
helpful to a person, if I can understand that this is what's happening for hip hop artists, or this a person like myself who may um, be interested in using hip hop as a tool of growth. Well, if I could give you an assessment that helped me to understand where you were in your development, and I could kind of plot where you were in your development, I could say, oh, well, he's here. He's at a ethnocentristic stage of he has an ethnocentric worldview. Well, is it healthy ethnocentrism, or is it unhealthy ethnocentrism? Or how do we get him to a healthy level of ethnocentrism? Or how would a world-centric view benefit him instead of his ethnocentric view?
Mm.
How would that be a healthier view for this person? But it gave me the ability to ask questions differently about hip hop's usefulness. Excuse me, instead of its entertainment value.
Mm.
Um, so that was again around the year um, 2000, and again it was because of the class that I took in Amsterdam. Ken Wilber's text was one of my books, and one of my textbooks in the class, and from then, man, I just read everything that I could get my hands on of Wilbur's, and then I met my good friend Corey DeVos, and he's Ken Wilbur's editor,
Wow.
or an editor in chief. I can't remember Corey's title. Forgive me, Corey, if you hear this. Um, but Corey was the very first person in the world to reach out to me. Um, in 2003, he found the very first thing that I ever wrote and like published online, and it was like, yo, I'm from the Integral Institute, and I'm a student at Ken Wilber's. Can you got time to talk? And we've been friends since 2003, and he really has kept me in the world of Integral, and has used a lot of my stuff. Like he's used my music for like Ken Wilber's podcasts, and
Oh,
um,
that's cool.
I'm an author at Integral Life, and
Mm.
so Corey's really kept me in the loop. Corey's helped me write this book that I'm working.
Okay.
And so anyway, um, you asked about the consciousness, culture, craft, and community.
Yes.
And basically those four words are words that explain the dimensions of what Ken Wilber calls the AQAL map, AQAL, all quadrants, all lines, all levels, all states, all types. And it basically is just a way to understand the main four dimensions. So consciousness is the interior of the individual, um, what he would call the upper left quadrant. So consciousness just means there is a dimension of our experience that is just our own first person that no one's ever going to experience but us. All
Mm.
right, my thoughts, my feelings, my awareness, what arises as phenomena in the space of that awareness. No one's ever going to see that, just me. Right. So it says, well, we should probably look at that area as an important area to explore if we want to understand not just hip hop, but where hip hop arises from. It arises out of the minds of people. Both in its expression and how we understand it.
Mm.
So if we don't understand how that's informing how we understand hip hop, then we're missing, all right, an important piece of how to truly examine, and in a way, I even say with intention, determine what hip hop is going to be.
Mm.
So anyway, that's consciousness. That's the interior of individuals. Um, Culture is the interior of collectives, of groups. So culture is the set of values, morals, and practices through which those values and morals show up. It's also the worldview that we take. Do we is my culture a self-centered one? Is it a group-centered one, or is it a world-centered one? Okay. And so culture says that we have to examine the values of the groups that we say that we belong to.
Mm.
Hip hop for a long time, because of KRS-One, has been understood as being a culture. Um, I don't hold to that. I don't adhere to that thinking anymore. I call hip hop an ecosystem,
Mm.
because it being a culture limits it to that one realm, right?
Mm.
I'm really saying hip hop is consciousness, culture, craft, and community all together. It's not just a culture.
Mm.
But it is important that we focus on hip hop's values, right? What are the values of this group that we say that we belong to? Whether that's our crew, camp, clique, squad, you know, music label, freestyle, cipher, or just as a kind of a what's the word? A Maha community, a greater community,
Yeah.
um, maybe more amorphous called hip hop. But how do I understand the values of it, and how do we develop? How do we grow? How do we evolve our values so that way they are beneficial, not just to me, but and not just to my group, but to as many beings as possible, right? How do I use my values to care, to bring about care and concern for as many beings as possible and to embrace as many beings as possible. Craft is the behavioral perspective of hip hop or of meta theory, really. And that's the exterior of individuals, right? What am I doing with my body, right?
Mm.
Through behavior. So in hip hop, we would say skills, right?
The
How
rhymes
am
you're writing, the way you're scratching,
all that
the B
dancing,
boys, B girls, B thems.
how you writing, all that,
Yeah.
right? Right. And yeah, so what are the skills, right? And we say, well, there's, the great American poet Meek Mills once said, there's levels to this,
Yeah.
and so he's right, right? There's levels of skills. There's levels of being dope at rhyming or writing or, so on, b-boying, so on and so forth. And that's important, right? And so I realized that it's not that we should not focus on the skill-based aspect of hip hop, but we should say, what are my skills in service of? What am I
Mm.
writing? If I am going to write, right? Am I writing to be dope? Because writing, I can be real skilled at egocentric writing and then really do nothing but just like, just write all day about, pat myself on the back and be self-congratulatory, which I may need if I need to boost my sense of self-worth or self-value. I may
Yeah.
be thinking hard, bad about myself, right? Um, so again, it's not bad, but it's like, well, yeah, I could write all day till I'm blue in the face and be dope, but I question if we are seeing the evolution of how we write or the um, even conceptually or with our vocabulary or um, if we're doing that, if we're understanding it through the lens of being a benefit to myself or being a benefit to something other than my ego or really just being a benefit to my ego. So I
Mm.
began to like pull away really from writing just for the sake of writing or rhyming for the sake of rhyming, even though I still love to do, I love to have fun and rhyme and write. Um, I really started to think about, well, what really is, um, what's the behavior for, and then um, what other um, uh, uh, views and practices inform the behavior of the elements of hip hop. So, for example, what does diet and nutrition have to do with our the way that we show up behaviorally in hip
Mm.
hop? That is not just about if I'm a dope writer. If I'm not alive, then I'm not dope. You know, So in hip hop, we have a lot of dead people who die early because we're punishing ourselves, we're punishing our bodies. And the focus is on behaviorally being dope. But who gives a fuck if you're not here?
Yeah.
I would much rather learn how to stay alive from you than have you come into the world and like, drop two, three dope albums and then you're dead. And now I get to play your albums back, but now I'm not learning anything else from you except for, how dope you were in the past. And so for me, asking the question differently, not just what are the skills, the creative skills that show up, that we should examine, and the levels of creative skills that we should examine help us to understand behavior in hip hop, but literally, what are we doing with our bodies, with intention, to evolve them, to grow them, to be a benefit to the ecosystem of hip hop, right? And so that's a skill too, right?
Mm.
And then the lower right is community. right? And that's again, how do we examine how hip hop has organized itself, the social influences, um, the issues with race, class, gender, technology, anything that's influenced how we've organized ourselves, um, and in understanding that there are ways that we can organize ourselves that facilitate healthiness and wholeness for hip hop as a community, or that promote death and destruction, or that don't care for ourselves as a community. So it's looking at the both how we've organized ourselves, why we've organized ourselves in the ways that we have, and what's influenced how we organize ourselves. Um, so to be able to, with intention, to create new systems that benefit hip hop in a way that just doesn't bring us money, but again that brings about care and concern for the people that are in the world of hip hop. Also taking a look at the systems that are harmful to hip hop and allowing for that spirit of systemic dismantling to also show up to say that
Yes.
some of these systems need to be destroyed.
Yeah.
And part of the reason why we haven't been able to evolve systemically as hip hop is because there are some systems that ain't been destroyed yet.
Yo, that's
Yeah.
real.
So those are the dimensions through consciousness, um, culture, craft, and community. Basically says you're not looking at hip hop if you're not looking at all four of those things. Right?
Yeah.
Teaching hip
That's
hop
the
if you're
ecosystem of it.
That's the ecosystem, right? You're not understanding and you're not teaching and you're not learning. Um, you're not practicing hip hop if you're not looking at it through those four lenses because that's what's actually happening in every single experience, in every
Yeah.
in every single moment of whatever we're doing, it involves those four areas.
Yeah. Oh, that's dope, man. That's a lot to contemplate. I'm starting to get into Wilbur and understand these quadrants and everything. So that
Mhm.
thank you for putting that in like the hip hop connection.
Thank you
Um
for having me.
kind of going off that, like what given well, first of all, just like how you feeling about the current state of our country as part A, and then part B is what with that feeling, what's your call to action from an
Mm,
integral hip hop educator perspective? Like,
mm,
um, it's like, how do you see these quadrants, an integral hip hop? How can that be a path for us, older heads who grew up in the 90s with hip hop, but then, for the youth that are just
yep,
embodying hip hop as it is right now,
yep,
and
yep.
forming your own definitions.
Yeah, man. Good questions. The times we live in now, right? Um, I was texting someone earlier, a friend of mine, and he said like something like, "How you doing?" And part of my response was, um, on top of all the other things going on in my life, and just what it means to have a body, or to have a family, or to have a household to take care of, or to be employed somewhere and want to be a good employee. Um, you know, the realization of um, of the country being of America being led by overt racists and criminals, people willing to dehumanize whoever they need to dehumanize, who don't embrace truth or objective reality, um, and to see um, the permission granted for all of those things that take place by the media, by the average citizen um, who may just say, "Man, I'm just going to go along to get along," or they say, "Well, this is just how things are now, I guess." Um, it's been very difficult to sit with um, because I'm a student of history, And um, and this is not to be forgiving to the Democratic Party either, um, but the Trump and MAGA brand of Americans um, are, when I examine history, um, are the ones that don't go away through um, appeal to the heart, legislation, um, protest. Um, anyone that's able to get away with um, kind of openly lying about reality um, exists. Their existence um, um, can't be brought down through like rational thinking or rational means. Their whole thing is about avoiding logic and reality. And so, the kind of pushback that I feel like Trump and MAGA require is not born of like anything normal. And we're not, this isn't politics right now. If we think that this is politics, then we got it really fucked up.
Mm.
Um, And so I feel like, of course, the country's in a terrible place, and that the response can't be anything that's happened before.
Yeah.
It can't be a normal response. If you're not going to directly fight them and say, I'm not going to, I mean, this is what America allegedly did in 1861 with the Civil War, but if you're not going to fight them and say there will be no racists that run around dehumanizing people, right? Not going to happen. We're gonna forcefully not just tell you no, but we're going to stop you. We're going to have a whole war about it. If you're not going to do that, then that gets into the other part of what you were saying is, well, what are you going to do to liberate yourself,
Mm.
right? Like, how are you taking your own mind and whatever influence you can be in the minds and behavior over the minds and behaviors of others um, to help them to take the reins of control. What are you going to do um, to help yourself and other people liberate yourself both from being harmed by them, but then also realizing that you are in control of creating your reality, creating your world, and organizing yourself and educating yourself and mobilizing yourselves. How do you use the tools that you have at your disposal, not just for your resistance, but for your liberation? And for me, that's what hip hop also is. But the view of hip hop, if you use not just the meta theoretical view, but take a contemplative view, you see um, it contained within the definition of hip hop itself, qualities that are inherent, right, that are not birthed, but they're there. They exist within us already. Peace exists within us already. Wisdom is inherent, exists within us already, right? It
Mm.
just begs for us to just look, right, and be liberated by an experience that's already present within us. So if we take that approach to hip hop, we say, okay, well, I'm not trying to liberate myself necessarily through making the music, or if I make enough of the music in this way, I'm going to be free. I'm saying, no, there's inherent liberation that already exists. The question is, how am I looking? Am I looking for that experience? Am I using a lens that helps me to see that experience? you know, or experience knowledge, not as knowledge as objective knowledge, but knowledge as luminosity or inquisitiveness, right?
Mm.
Of attentiveness. These things again are innate. I don't have to cultivate attentiveness. All right, it's already there. So awareness is already there, right? So that's the liberation. Like hip hop can um, help us to experience liberation, the liberation that comes from seeing what is already present. Um, sometimes I label that as liberation as, right?
Mm.
Liberation as what you already have or as what you
Mm.
already are, right? And then we can, taking the meta theoretical perspective, hip hop can be used as liberation from, right? So we can use the elements of hip hop to liberate ourselves from um, um, cognitive distortions, right? Or emotional avoidance, right? Or emotional dysregulation, right? How do I use the elements to bring about emotional regulation, which gives me control over myself and liberates me from that being a source of my suffering or being in control over me, right? While the world is crazy around me, I need to take the reins of control over myself. Or how do I use hip hop as a tool of helping me to increase my spiritual intelligence or spiritual experience, which is a lot of what you read on the site around, if I've tried to synthesize practices with contemplative practices like Buddhist refuge practice or Bodhisattva practices or any practices that brings about an experience of something that either is of ultimate value or that is transcendent. The idea is, well, how do we use our understanding of hip hop as a way of um, facilitating spiritual experiences?
Mm.
Mindfulness-based freestyling is that for me, right? How do I
Mm.
use, it's like the stages of shamatha, how do I move someone through the stages of cultivating mindfulness, of stability, clarity, and strength of mindfulness? Um, and then also, how do we use the tools of hip hop to grow morally, right? To make sure that we aren't limiting our view of how our values inform us, that we're not limiting our view to the entertainment value or even the kind of the value of groups that maybe we've thought that we should uplift in hip hop. Recently, I've been writing about the 5% Nation of Gods and Earths and how the 5% Nation has really informed a lot of hip hop's ethos. In fact, I mean, most of even the definition that Africa Bambaataa came up with, comes straight out of the
Yeah.
sacred mathematics and alphabet um,
Words
of
like cipher.
exactly knowledge born, freedom, culture, all that,
Yeah.
that come out of the 5% Nation. But if we're adhering to the values that come out of the 5% Nation just because they're the 5% Nation, it doesn't allow us to say, well, what would happen if we took a kind of world-centric view on the 5% Nation of gods and earths, and how would that change the way that we understand values? That if the values weren't paying fealty to just Black people or what we think of as a Black culture, and we looked at it as a world-centric culture, a worldwide culture, um, how can we how can a world-centric worldview inform us in a way that says value more than just the tenets of one group or a group that we align ourselves with. So basically, it opened by exploring the values of hip hop. It hopefully opens our heart to embrace more of each other, beyond our personal feelings or our our affinity for a particular group, and see that we all belong to this ecosystem of hip hop, and that we are all useful. That we're all
Mm.
going to kind of need each other through these
Mm.
times. The same thing for craft um, and for community. Again, exploring not just why we focus so heavily on the artistic skills, um, but um, how are we understanding our behavior just in everyday life as a means of liberating ourselves from the suffering of either addiction or impulsivity or mindlessness of what we do with our bodies, seeing that we're not going to be able to um, free ourselves from kind of habitual tendencies until we stop and say, well, what's up with that behavior? Why do I eat like that? Why do I put that on my skin? Why do I shop there? Why do I consume that? Why do I
Mm.
practice that with my body? What's the
Mm.
effect of that? Does it keep me tethered? Or does it keep me trapped to the shit I'm trying to get away from? You know, and community, how do we explore not just, how we tended to form communities in hip hop, but what communities are we building that are genuinely helping us to liberate ourselves? I talk about trying to create hip hop a school of mysticism, how do we create new institutions that help us to have new understandings of what we can do collectively.
Yeah.
Besides have fun or besides rhyme or besides whatever. I'm cool with all that shit. But I'm
Yeah.
like, yo, could we also get together and like, could we have a monastery? Could we,
Yeah, no doubt.
could we get like 100 hip hop contemplatives in the space? And if we could, what would that be like? Or
Mm,
if hip hop was going to organize against a Trump or a MAGA, what would that look like? And what have we done in the past? And what could we do if we reimagine how we could use our organizational skills? How might they look differently? What have been the limitations of viewing hip hop in its usual social organ in its usual ways that we organize ourselves socially? What's been the harm of that? So
mm,
that way we stop creating that, and we say we don't have to do that. We don't have to do that, especially if it's hurting us. Let's do something different. So in today's time, using metatheory and and kind of an integral lens to look at the elements of hip hop and how we understand and practice hip hop, I think is important because it frees us from whatever we've been doing and however we've been understanding ourselves and hip hop in the past, and has us ask those questions differently for today's time, not just to like uphold tradition um, 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 or to um, or to think that how we've used hip hop in the past has really been beneficial for us in the past or beneficial for us in the present. It really says, how can we respond to what's actually going on in a new way, in a fresh way, instead of just repeating what's been done.
mm.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Ooh, soaking that in and just kind of feeling, man, if you have the energy for it, just guiding us in a little practice to end our time, maybe a little guided meditation.
Hmm, that is a good question. Let's see.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, let's see. Um, hmm. Well, how about this? I don't want to do anything super special. And what I mean by that is um, one thing that I think that I've taken away from all this studying and practicing and stuff um, is that at the end of the day, the goal is to be natural. You
Yeah.
know? Um, and what that means is um, not even necessarily trying to cultivate anything or
Hmm.
create anything, um, but to experience what's already here or inherent,
Yeah.
and what you came in the world with, what you carry around with you every day that you may miss. Um, and then also seeing the experience of being human as natural,
Mm.
which means not um, avoiding or constantly trying to get rid of aspects of our human experience that we're going to experience fear, we're going to experience pain, we're going to experience loss and shame, guilt, all those things. And the experience of those things are also kind of food for our growth, that we don't actually grow without those experiences. And so natural is not about creating an experience or getting rid of an experience. It's more about welcoming the reality of experience.
Yes.
And so if we if we want to practice for a minute, maybe the experience of welcoming, right? The
Mm.
experience of allowance, right? Without discrimination, um, without trying to get somewhere um, or get rid of something. We can allow ourselves to, sometimes in the Buddhist tradition, they say take a good seat,
Mhm.
um, and just some um, relaxed but attentive posture. And welcoming doesn't have to involve trying to gin anything up. Really, it's about whatever's arising and allowing whatever's arising just to be present. So the allowance of whatever's arising is much more important than what is arising, the holding on to whatever's arising. If it's already there, it's going to be there tomorrow. You don't have to worry about losing it or making it again. So we're just going to witness and welcome whatever arises. Let's just sit still like this for a minute. Just allowing, not discriminating. Also understand hip hop as an allowance, right? Hip hop allows for whatever experience that we're having to be seen as valid, right? Allowance of experiencing what we already have at our disposal, who we are, to not be ashamed of who we are. Hip hop also allows us to see where we need to grow and where we can grow. So adopting the stance of allowance is what allows us to use hip hop in ways to help us to see what we are and what we can be. So again, let's just return to the space of welcoming and understanding that through the lens of hip hop. All right. And the goal, and the goal is to live that, right? It is to show up in the world with the experience of welcoming, right? Where a term we've been working with around the house the last couple of days is non-affirming negation. And non-affirming negation basically means when we show up in the world, we're not walking around labeling, discriminating, right? Really, it's non-affirming. I realize that that nothing that arises is going to be able to be qualified by my perception, right? So I'm walking around affirming, I'm not affirming, right? Every time I think that I'm holding on to something, I let it go. Right? And negation means it never existed like that to begin with. So there's no there's no difficulty in letting things be what they already are because they never were what I thought they were going to be, or that they were in the first place. And so hip hop, well, that experience of welcoming is the same way, right? I'm not discriminating what comes up. I'm not walking around saying I need things to be this way, right? I can't be a benefit to the world of to myself or the world of hip hop if I'm limiting my perspective. So going into the world through the lens and with the lens of just welcoming allows me to see what can be done, what's the potential here,
Yeah.
right? Who needs help? What needs help? How can I show up here, right? So anyway, the fruition is, please practice that in everyday life. You
Mm,
know, take the stance of welcoming
yeah.
into your life. That is the experience of hip hop. Is not being dope at an element. It's not being just great at an element, right? It's about saying, how can I show up in this space and help it to fully be realized, fully to be expressed and understood in a way that is genuine and authentic to it. You know, that's it. That's more hip hop than any dope verse anyone ever
That's it.
ever kicked.
Being is dope.
Being is dope. Right. My guy.
Yo,
Jesse,
thank
thank you
you,
so much, brother. Nah, man, thank you, man.
man. Yeah, I hope this is the first of many conversations.
Me too.
I'm gonna stop it right here.